All right, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining Hacking the System, Elevating Student Voice Choice Agency within traditional public schools. We are so happy to have you joining us today, and we're going to give folks just a moment to join us from the waiting room. So while we do, we'd love to invite you to drop your name, your organization, and where you're calling from in the chat so we can get a sense of who is in the room. Hello, Ashley. Welcome. All right, I think everyone from the waiting room has made their way in, so we're going to get started. For those of you who I haven't had a chance to meet yet, my name is Ray Limer. I'm a partner of research and measurement at the Learning Accelerator, and I have the privilege of moderating today's webinar on behalf of TLA. You'll also see my colleagues, Daniela and Megan, in the chat, starting to share some important information around accessibility, as well as supporting our moderation of the Q&A. Throughout the session, please feel free to submit your questions either in the chat or using the Q&A function, and we'll do our best to address as many of those as we can during the Q&A portion of today's call. If you haven't done so already, please introduce yourselves in the chat and let us know the organization or where you're calling in from. We are thrilled to be hosting this conversation because we know how crucial it is to design learning environments that support the whole child, which includes centering their voice, choice, and agency. At TLA, we believe that high-quality instruction is personalized, mastery-based, and focuses on the whole child, and we know that the work educators and leaders are doing to design learning with student voice at the center will create meaningful opportunities for learners to reach their full potential. Today's conversation is about how we can cultivate learning environments that center student voice, choice, and agency within traditional public school systems, offering insights into how we can turn system constraints into opportunities to innovate. We are very fortunate to be joined today for this important conversation by Karen Perry, the Executive Director of the University of Kentucky Center for Next Generation Leadership, Pat Phillips, the CTE Director of Bismarck Public Schools, and Jordan Body, a teacher at Avalon Park Fine and Performing Arts Magnet School in Chicago, each of whom are leading the charge in ensuring our young people are active participants in driving their learning. To give you all a little bit more background on TLA and who we are an organization that envisions a world in which every student receives the effective, engaging, and equitable education that students need to reach their full and unique potential. Our work spans across the education sector, partnering with districts, schools, and organizations to build a more connected and responsive K-12 field. We believe that by learning and working faster together, we can change systems to produce radically better outcomes for kids. We do this in three ways. The first is by setting and advancing an agenda for change by communicating an actionable direction for students, systems, and the sector. The second is by accelerating progress on key learning priorities by speeding up individual, organizational, and field-level learning and action. And the third is by building field-wide capacity to learn and share by supporting aligned partners to learn faster in more open and connected ways. Spanning these three buckets is our Exponential Learning Initiative, which is a bold effort to tackle one of the most urgent challenges in education, persistent learning gaps. Through this initiative, TLA is leading a network of technology partners, school systems, and researchers to accelerate learning, not just at the edges, but at the very heart of the student experience. Within ELI is the Accelerating Adoption Network, where we're supporting the implementation and scaling of 10 networks, which are providing technology-supported innovation in learning environments across America to effectively understand how they work in classrooms as they scale. Another component of ELI is our evidence study, where we're conducting a mixed method study of 6 high-quality virtual and hybrid models who have shown success in facilitating learning instruction within their learning acceleration within their context. Karen and Pat are joining us from this initiative, and we're looking forward to learning with them along with Jordan today. Over the past several months of working together, we've begun to wonder how we can support educators and leaders in navigating traditional public school systems to innovate for student voice, choice, and agency. So with that, I'm thrilled to introduce our panelists today and invite them to share a little bit more about themselves, starting with Karen Perry, the Executive Director of the University of Kentucky Center for Next Generation Leadership. Karen?
Hi there. Nice to be with you all today. I'm excited to have this conversation. Agency is one of our favorite things that we think about and work toward at our organization. I'll give a little bit of background of our organization. We are a center connected to the College of Education at University of Kentucky called the Center for Next Generation Leadership. We care a lot about upgrading the school experience for students, for educators, and for folks around public schools. So in our organization, we believe in these things that we call the Next Gen 9, which are what we believe characterize what learning should look like for students. And so you can see those things articulated on the left-hand side there. Competencies, a lot of the things that Ray already mentioned, that is probably binding ties for all of us fellow travelers here. Competencies, student-centered learning environments, authentic applied experiences, a robust system of supports for students to be successful. And all of those things need to be surrounded by lots of opportunity and access for students, every single kind of student. And so we work a lot at our center with building capacity of leaders and teachers to make these kinds of learning environments happen. One of the things that we do in our center is we run dual credit on behalf of University of Kentucky. So we're working to change high schools through leveraging dual credit opportunities for all students across Kentucky. And so it's just a joy to be here with you for this conversation. And that's just a little bit about my organization. Just personally, I'm executive director. All my time before this has been in P12 schools. I was a teacher and then an assessment person, but a director of personalized learning and a graduation coach. So I spent a lot of time helping kids navigate a system and then time trying to change the system as well. So it's nice to be here with fellow travelers this afternoon.
Thank you. So next, we're going to welcome Pat Phillips, the CTE Director for Bismarck Public Schools.
Awesome. Thanks, Ray. Hello, everybody. I'm coming to you from the Bismarck Public Schools Career Academy, which is our CTE center. We serve face-to-face regional students, but we also have an online CTE opportunities for learners spanning from Canada to South Dakota, right through the middle swath of North Dakota. So thousands of learners that we have access to. And what I'm really excited to talk about today is our Empower Ed program, which is an opportunity for our junior and senior learners to earn their core subject credits, the things that they need to graduate from high school here in North Dakota, through the context of community embedded value add projects and also their CTE classes. So we really are focused on these 5 things and those experiences, building positive relationships, building our community. Of course, as Karen mentioned, learner agency and helping learners to develop and adopt and execute their own agency. Giving them the opportunity to graft their identity through being part of their community and not just being in a school, and really to build some transferable skills for themselves as they move on to what they aspire to in life. So that's the lens we're coming to from. Looking forward to the conversation.
And now we're going to welcome Jordan Body, a teacher over at Avalon Park Fine and Performing Arts Magnet School.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am here representing Chicago, home of the best downtown and the best pizza. At Avalon Park, we believe in integrity, academic progress, and building trust, and all of that weaves in and talks about student agency as we talk about their freedom to choose, their freedom to be who they are while learning, while connecting to standards. I'm very happy to be able to share more with you all as we move into this year to a personalized learning school. So that's all about our brand. How do we personalize learning for our students? How do we let them be free within and outside the classroom while still learning standards, while still learning skills, and while mastering everything they need to do?
Amazing. I'm excited for today's conversation. I hope you all are jazzed up. It's gonna be a great time. And so to start, I want to know, what does student agency mean to you all, and why is it critical for today's learners? Start with you, Karen.
Thanks for the question, Ray. For me, in very simplest terms, student agency is really about students making substantive decisions about how they learn, what they learn, and how they show what they learn. It's important because there's going to come a time when they're not told how to learn, what to learn, and how to show what they learn. And so the best thing that we can do while they're in formative years is help them get build up a strong set of muscles around making those decisions. I think the other thing about agency that I think about a lot is that it's directly connected to self-efficacy and your own belief that you can accomplish your goals. And in order to prove that to yourself, you have to really do it. And so I don't think it's abstract. I think it's really concrete and real to important to students and also important to educators. I know we're here talking about student agency, but I'd also put a plug in for not bypassing anybody's agency in the system. So that's what I think about agency and why it's important.
Nice. Pat, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more with everything you said. I think a couple things that I would add from our perspective, we always talk a lot about who learners are, how they learn best, and what they aspire to be, right? And beyond just having a voice or being able to make some small choices about how they might go about their education, we're really thinking about how are learners acting on their own behalf, right? Like that's really what it means to be agentic, to your point about efficacy, and what kind of authentic real world opportunities do they have to do that and to experience that, to reflect on the outcomes from that. And so I really think it matters, partially because we know our students are part of our communities today, right now. They don't need to graduate in order to add value to our system. They don't need to be, something special other than what they are to add value right now today. And so we talk a lot about how can they sort of be who they are without having to meet any other requirements, and act on their own behalf in their education. I don't know when that hasn't been important for learners. Like when I really think about why is it important today, I think it's always been, and it's good that we remind ourselves of it.
Great. Jordan.
Love it. Adding on to Pat and Karen, in my eighth grade curriculum, the first unit question we ask is, what is home? And every year, the students always talk about home being somewhere where you're safe, being somewhere where you're free, somewhere you can make your own choices. So when we talk about that agency, we talk about the amount of time our students spend at school. It should be someplace that they consider a safe place, somewhere they consider home. So when they get to make some of their own decisions, or at least have an input and put their voices in the decisions that are made for them, it makes it that place where they can learn freely, where they can learn and do, and when they can excel. When you feel like you have an input in something, usually you try harder to succeed, to achieve it. So giving our students that freedom, giving them that free will, giving them that choice, it makes everyone's lives better. It makes everyone's lives enjoyable, and that creates that joyous environment that I'm sure all educators are trying to create their schools.
Oh, I love. I'm like, I want to go to your school now. So what I'm hearing from this is it's our kids bring value now, and we need to create safe places where they're able to really shine and showcase the talents that they're bringing to the table. The challenge that I think a lot of us have seen is that our systems are currently not designed to enable that. So I'm curious about how you all have navigated some of the system constraints within your various contexts that might have prevented you from being able to offer these high quality agentic learning experiences. So I'm wondering, Karen, what systemic or historical barriers have made student voice and choice difficult in traditional public school systems that you've seen, and how have you started to see schools start to navigate and move past those?
I think an old mental model that, curriculum is the most important thing, and that curriculum has to be covered at a certain pace, and that you demonstrate what you know in a particular way, which largely is standardized tests. I think those are all really limiting mental models, and then the systems and structures that get built around those things. There's a desire for efficiency there. There's a desire for clearly measurable outcomes there. And I understand why all of those things are where they are. I think they are are though really limiting at this particular point in time, just given the breadth of student experience that comes to us, all the knowledge that's being created every minute of every day. The idea that we're going to capture curriculum in a bucket and that's the stuff that everybody has to know because you're at a particular age and moment in time, I think is a really antiquated just mindset. Some of the things that we're seeing, and I can speak to Kentucky in this way, is a beginning to sort of loosen up that sort of ball of all those intertwined ideas, just kind of pull it apart a little bit and say, maybe standardized tests are not the only way that we measure the things that we care about. So when we look more broadly at things like competencies, being an effective collaborator and communicator, and saying, what does that really mean? How might a student show that? So you've got defenses of learning as a way that you've got a lot of room in there for agency for kids to talk about. I'm really good at that set of competencies. You've got a lot of schools really thinking about, in Kentucky, we use language around vibrant learning. What are vibrant learning experiences which are applied, problem solving, real world, authentic learning experiences? What can it look like for schools to build more of those in, and begin to make room for kids to make substantive decisions about what those applied learning looks like, to include but not limited to internships, capstones, project-based learning, passion projects, those kinds of things where kids can kind of come closer into what they care about, what their own personal mission is, and begin to pursue that with the support of educators around them that help them pursue those goals. Those are the kinds of things that we're seeing more of in Kentucky. It's really amazing to go see it in action, and we're super excited about it. What we need to think about now is an accountability system that honors that. And that doesn't squeeze it out and force it to happen around the edges of the system, but instead incentivizes it, supports it, and recognizes the outcomes that come out of it. So that's some of the exciting work that's happening in Kentucky. Our own team is offering dual credit as another sort of pathway in high schools to get students different kinds of learning opportunities for kids. But it's happening really all over the state at all different kind of levels.
It's really exciting. And I've seen a lot of threads from the work that you're doing in Empower Ed, Pat, up in Bismarck. You're really leading with a lot of this competency-based and passion-led work, as well as building the accountability structures that go along with it. So I'm curious, how has your team navigated the various system constraints in front of you all, such as policies, schedules, or budgets, to develop the student-driven model that you all have?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because our North Dakota Personalized Learning Network that we're a member of with many other schools, very similar to the work that Karen and her counterparts in Kentucky are working on, really thinking about the biggest constraint that we had was just the seat time constraint, right? The Carnegie unit, the measure of using time as a measure of learning instead of as a resource for learning. And so we're lucky enough to be able to get a seat time waiver with our State Department of Public Instruction, which I think is a huge takeaway for me. To be able to work cooperatively with oversight agencies has been just a great boon to us. But once that door opened for us, Ray, I think after that, to Karen's point, a lot of the constraints were built around that one constraint. And so as we started to think about how could we work with our community, once that went away, we were able to start thinking very creatively about where could students be, what could they be doing, what is evidence of learning, and I completely agree. Sometimes our metrics are a little bit off, and so a focus. The terminology we use is career-ready practices, but we say durable skills, we say agentic skills, right? We say lifelong skills, success skills. Really focusing on those and the learner first, we've found helps us to generate the enduring understandings that we're actually after academically. So I think part of it is just focusing on students and figuring out ways to make the system stretch to make those things work.
I'm wondering what this looks like at the classroom level, right? Because as you're navigating these systems, a lot of times there are conversations that principals, district office, but like partners might be having with legislature or state boards. But I'm wondering, Jordan, what has your experience been as a classroom teacher designing a classroom around student voice and choice when all of the other systems working around you might not be for it?
Absolutely right. I am lucky enough to serve under a principal who allows us to be ourselves. Of course, we're going to meet the mark. We're going to do what is expected of us. We are going to make sure our students are exposed to the standards, but we have what people in our network like to call the Avalon Parkway. So we're going to do what's expected, but we're going to add a little pizzazz, a little jazz to it at all times. So, yes, in eighth grade, a student is expected to write a 5-paragraph essay or a story that's multiple pages, but it doesn't have to be the exact same essay. It doesn't have to be the exact same story. So I expose my students to different options. There's an activity I like to do with dice, and it's like 5 different settings, 5 different character options, 5 different descriptions, and they get to roll the die and it gets to land on these different things. So yes, everyone is meeting the standard of W 8.3, writing a narrative, but not everyone's narrative is the same. So it makes it interesting for the student. It also makes it interesting for the teacher because now you're not reading 32 of the exact same narrative with the same plot or the same character. So adding those different ways when you walk into our hallways, we like to call it bursting in the hallways. When you walk up to the floor, we have couches, we have TVs in the hallway, we have high tables, we have cushions that you could bring out to the hallway. So if you go to our second floor, which is our STEM floor, yes, all the students are learning about ratios, but it looks different. Our teachers at our school this year, they turned the entire second floor into a restaurant and a food court. And so they were working on ratios and rates and volume, but they had menus and they got to go to Miss Strahan's food court. They got to go to Miss L's food court. And so we just bring it alive. So yes, we have to meet the standard. Yes, our students have to be able to write. Yes, they have to know fractions and volume, but it doesn't have to look the same. It can be fun. It can be chaotic noise. Bursting inside out is what we do.
All right, well, I would love to be a student in your class at your school. Sign me up. I mean, I think all of you have spoken a lot about like the joy of learning for not only students but also for educators who get to witness like how students are bringing their own um, thoughts around how they should approach learning, whether that's content or how they like how they're seated or any of those other pieces that support whole child development. What I'm wondering is, what does this impact look like to you? Like, what else have you seen as outcomes to having this style of learning? Especially thinking about folks who might be saying, well, we have to be held accountable to these standardized tests. We can't be pursuing a agentic model of learning because we have to do these things. What impact have you actually seen as leading these types of models?
Uh, I would jump in, Ray, and just share. I don't see those two things as mutually exclusive. And I don't think that the things that we've seen in our learners and heard from our community members that our learners are working with, is that those two things are mutually exclusive, right? That learners can be engaged in authentic, real world contexts and demonstrating the learning that they need to demonstrate, and still create enduring understandings that allow them to pass the tests that they need to pass. We haven't experienced any negative sort of academic impacts. I think the biggest experience we've had there is maybe a distraction on the educators or some perceptual barriers that aren't really systemic barriers. They're just what we perceive to be true. And so for us, seeing more engaged, confident learners, seeing learners who have relationships with adults in our community outside of school, seeing learners who are shifting their focus from getting good grades or graduating from high school to contributing to their communities. Like all of these things are the real bottom line from our experience of what happens when we trust the teachers and we trust the students who are doing that work together.
We work with a lot. I totally agree. We work with a lot of teachers, and we have this conversation and begin sort of getting them to shift to fostering more student agency in their classroom. And lots of them say, I was scared to do this because I thought I had to make all the decisions and I had to control everything, and it was all my responsibility. And then when I started to sort of let go and shift some of that ownership and responsibility, kids really actually surprised me. They outperformed what I thought they were going to do. And now look at them. I mean, they actually took this thing way farther than what I could do, which is such an amazing moment for teachers, to feel like I was a little bit scared to try this. And then when I really just leaned into it and just let go a little bit, kids really did more than what I was even expecting. That is joy, for educators. And so one of the outcomes that we see on the other side of this is joy. I'd have to say, and just listening to Jordan and Pat both talk about what the learning experience looks like, if we're moving away from standardization, and moving more toward a personalized environment, um, there are a lot of decisions to be made in there, and it can't be a fully teacher's responsibility to figure out how to know every student, what all their interests are, what all their strengths are, what all their needs are, what all the resources are. Some of this decision making has to shift over to kids because it is an inhumane ask, to ask teachers to know all these things and make all the decisions at all points for kids. And so it really is a case for getting kids' own set of muscles to be stronger at making good substantive decisions on their own behalf. Like, you can find your own resources for things. Like, that's a really important lifelong skill. You can go do that. I don't have to pull every resource you need to do this project. That kind of stuff where, you don't have to open the floodgates and say, what do y'all feel like learning and what do you feel like doing today? And, it doesn't have to be that, but there are like specific levers that you can pull, and get them good at particular parts of this thing. That's not just to open the floodgates, but we have to, because teachers cannot do all of this on their own.
Karen, you hit it right on the head. That word joy and releasing some of that onto others. They're capable. And when you give them that chance, they will exceed your expectations. End of the year activity I do with my eighth graders is they create their own equity board games. And so we read a young adult version of the book Just Mercy. And then from that, they get to create board games about the justice system, where pretty much the whole purpose is to find justice for the character that they create. They create the whole plot, the title, they do an infographic, and then I let the sixth and seventh graders play those eighth grade board games. And so that was the full day. And the students came out, they were like, oh, this is the most fun. This was the best class. And I didn't do anything but walk around and facilitate and make sure that everyone was paying attention, everyone was where they were supposed to be, materials, that joy for the students, and then that relief from us. Because if you start giving your students that agency, that freedom, you'll find yourself not leaving the building at 2:45, 3:45, just completely exhausted. Yes, I still facilitated. Yes, I still had my tracker and I made sure that the mark was being met, that their board game, their rubrics, everything was there, but I didn't have to speak. I didn't have to say a whole thing for the block. I just got to walk around and watch my students have a great time and watch them lead and explain their game to their peers, which then makes my sixth and seventh graders excited for when they get to eighth grade because they can't wait to make their own board games.
Mhm.
What I'm hearing from each of you is that we need to trust our kids and we need to respect our kids, right? Like, they're bringing a lot of expertise and value, as are our educators, and we have to trust and believe that our educators can make sure things are aligned to the standards that need to be learned and that students are going to get the content that they need, while also respecting the fact that our students can lead a lot of this work and should be, in order to see the outcomes that we want to see, which for me would be predominantly joy, and also all of the other pieces like dual credit and all of the things that are going to be helpful for long-term success. So what I'm wondering is, what are some of these frameworks that you all are using to help guide this work? So Jordan, I'm going to start with you. Do you have a tool or a resource that you use to help you build student-centered environments?
So we believe in starting with the end in mind. So of course, like we've said millions of times, there's certain standards, certain things that we have to follow. We have a rigor walk, we have our teacher framework that we use, and from that we take from there, and then we decide how do we nail that down to our students. We use something called the 5 essentials cultivate survey. So we have certain things that we look for, that we pay attention to, and then we take that From our teacher framework, a few years ago, we realized that our questioning and our assessment was not where it was supposed to be. So then our principal came to the table, she laid that out. Our questioning and answering of our students is where it should be. The way we track assessment is where it should be. What do we do? And from there, our wonderful teaching staff, we created our own tracking system so that we're paying attention to what our students are doing every day. Now you don't get to Friday and your students are taking a quiz and you're surprised that 70% of the class didn't understand. Each day I walk around, I give a skill and I have my tracker and I know if they mastered it. So I know if already 70% of my students have mastered something by Wednesday, or if I need to do 2 weeks on a certain skill instead of one. So we look at the data, we look at the frameworks, and we bring it back. One thing we noticed last year, our writing across the board was not where it should be. We had certain grade levels that were great, but it's about every student, not just that one grade level is amazing writers or one grade band. So we had the opportunity to partnership with LEAP, which I saw in the chat. Hello, my LEAP partners. We got to be a part of cohort 8 for LEAP this year, and through them we got connected with No Red Ink. And No Red Ink is a beautiful digital writing tool, and it personalizes, it includes students' interests, it'll put their names in the prompts, they get to write short stories, essays, grammar practice, and our students loved it. They talked about the vocabulary that they get to use, they talk about the fun prompts that they got to explore and how it helped them become better writers. So we believe in data. We believe at looking at the numbers, looking at the facts. And then, like I said, we do our Avalon Parkway. We add our pizzazz and we make it work for us and our students that we serve.
Amazing. All right, Pat, what do you got? What kind of resources or frameworks do you have?
I mean, I think I would share two things. You know, a lot of what Jordan shared are things that we think about and that we work on too. But one of systemically, we created a learner dispositions guide for our counselors and our teachers and even for our parents. I think one of the systemic constraints that we saw, kind of going back to a previous question, was everything was GPA driven, right? Like to Karen's point about having the right metrics. And so in order to participate in our programs, we move away from any kind of GPA guidelines and say, here are dispositions that might indicate that your learner would benefit from or would thrive in a personalized learning environment. And what I'm hearing from our panel is that we have to make sure that we don't mistake flexibility for lack of structure, right? We still have structure, but we can work flexibly. And so we use those learner dispositions to help guide learners in self-reflection, but also counselors in identifying learners who might benefit from some of the experiences that we have. Additionally, we're trying to generate agency, right? Like what Karen said, personalized learning isn't about customizing content. Personalized learning is about creating the kind of learners who can shape their own futures, right? And so our teachers have developed an agency continuum, and they talk with learners and they set agency goals. You know, as you've come in, here's your experience, and here's what you think you need to do to be successful in school. But over here on this end of the agency continuum, what the things that you consider doing and that you might choose to do might be way more than you ever thought you would, or maybe you've never been presented with a choice like this in your life. Like it's one thing to make a choice about your own learning, but to be put in a situation where you're making decisions on the part of a community partner is a totally different type of choice for an agentic learner to make. And so we also have that learner agency continuum that we like to work with quite a bit and be as explicit we can with our learners about what is agency, how does it feel, what's next for you now that you've got this new agency muscle.
Karen, what type of resources or frameworks are you using?
Yeah, I love both of those things that Jordan and Pat already mentioned. First of all, Jordan's strategies in her classroom, amazing. And then I also love Continuum too, Pat. It's not just like all or nothing. There are sort of things along the way that, you know, are somewhere that helps teachers kind of get their head wrapped around it a little more clearly. Two things that I would share. there's an article written by an amazing, brilliant woman, Jenny Poon, who wrote it, I think, in partnership with Aurora Institute. I think she's at CIE now, Center for Innovation Education now. But it's a very clear article sort of laying out what do we mean by agency, and what is the case for it. I think just even having that conversation with teachers and educators is not as common as we would like it to be. So it is a shift away from curriculum acquisition and traditional metrics to say, actually, what is agency and why is it a worthy pursuit on its own merits? So I love that from her. It's a little bit of like just hearts and minds. And then once you've got people there and teachers sort of like are like, yeah, I get that. How do I do it in my classroom? There's a really great series from Larry Ferlazzo, who has just publishes tons of strategies. And Jordan like just mentioned several ones all at once there in her description in her classroom. I think the core of it is you really have to get kids really good at setting goals, actionable goals, smart goals for themselves, and then engaging in a cycle of like doing and then reflecting on those goals. And I think it's just really important. And then after that, you can just spin off and do all kinds of stuff. You can have kids teach other kids, and you can have kids track their own learning, and you can have kids go pursue a thing that is meaningful to them and come back and have an exhibition of learning about it. I mean, you can really spin off, but the core of it is you got to be able to manage your own decision making, know where it is that you're headed. I think it was Jordan that mentioned starting with the end in mind. Where is it I'm going? How am I going to get there? What did I learn after I got there? What did I learn about that in reflection cycle? That's really the core of it. We did a lot of that in my previous school district, and it's just really important. That's just like human stuff. That's not even specific to school. You got to be able to do that as an effective, like, competent person. Agree with Jinsu over there in the chat. Larry is great. So anyway, just go from hearts and minds to pragmatic. Those are my two that I would share.
Yeah, I love that all of you are like, no, we need structure. Structure is important. And this is going to guide the work that's happening. And I love that point, Karen, of like, you actually have to have a conversation. Like, we just assume folks know or are thinking the same way that we are, like, this is really important. Well, we have to take a moment to level set that conversation. I'm wondering, because for most of you, you're in the secondary space. You have students who've been in potentially very traditional school environments coming into your programs. And that might be an interesting transition of having to learn how to know what you want to learn about or how you want to approach your learning, how to kind of lean into having agency after potentially being very guided for a long period of time. So I'm curious, what have you all done to help students move from traditional school, I'm following the rules, to I'm leaning in and I'm really driving my own learning?
It's all about modeling. You can't just, sometimes it's cool to just jump in and see how it goes, but when you really want something to be successful, if it's something you want to sustain, it's all about modeling. This summer, our teachers, we're a little radical. We choose to come in the summer and we plan. So this year we're moving into a personalized learning space, which we've tapped into previously, but now we are actually a personalized learning school as it expected of us. Literally starting Monday, our teachers are coming in to start creating our choice boards. Our choice boards are connected to the standards that we'll be teaching, but it's different ways that our students can choose to expose that learning. So if I'm focusing on a certain standard, RL 65, I'm going to have different stations set up in my room, outside in the hallway. And with those different categories, there'll be 3 or 4 different options that'll help them practice that skill that they'll be able to choose from. And our teachers are going to come in over the summer and we're going to actually start creating those now. And we have certain students, some of our student council members, some of our leaders in the building who have also decided that they're going to come in over the summer so that we can practice it with them. So when we start the first few weeks of school, those students who already practiced with us over the summer, they'll be the leaders at their tables, at their groups, because they already know how to go through the stations. They're familiar with some of the activities. They'll be able to give us input on the activities, because sometimes as adults, we think things are so cool and so great, and we forget that we went to school and we were in middle school in 2005 or 2000 or whenever, and it's not so great. So we'll get that feedback from our students before we even run with it come August. So modeling, practicing input all from the jump so that everything runs as smoothly as possible. Of course, we'll still have to tweak because the certain students we have, they're not the only voice, right? Just because they thought it was great, we'll still get feedback so we can tweak. But the idea is to model, to practice, to get that input so it can be as smooth as possible when we start.
I love that. The feedback loop, I love how I'm seeing that there's agency both from the teacher level, but also that you're bringing students in from the ground floor of how are you structuring this learning and how are you co-creating it. It's great.
I'd add too, I agree with all of that. And I'd add too that older students in particular, although they sort of they understand the game of school. Many of them have sort of been brought up in it and they know how it works and how to do it. I they're at the same time they've been having lots of other learning experiences that they're pursuing of their own interests that happen outside of school. One of the things that's helpful is to draw their attention to that learning process. So like tell me, how did you go about learning how to play your favorite video game, right? How did it start? How did you get feedback? How did you know you were doing well? What did you do when it got hard? What were the things that helped you get better at that? You can draw down on their other life experiences to get them to be reflective about those things, sometimes outside of school, and then bring that conversation back into a classroom to say, okay, well, in this project that we're working on as a class and that we're co-creating, what should we do when things get hard? What are the resources that we have to help us? You can sort of get them to transfer things from outside the classroom into, and they have lots of life experiences that sometimes we just don't ask about or talk about or think about. And being intentional about that conversation, like it builds their executive functioning, it builds their own reflection, and that's what you're really trying to get them to do in school. It's not just about pursuing a particular piece of content.
I love that. Building relationships with the whole person. We have whole humans we're interacting with, not just little narrow slivers of life when they're in our classrooms.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And teachers too, right? Like educators also deserve that same bit of reflection and opportunity and agency and all of that. So sorry, Pat, I think I interrupted you.
No, not at all. I think you hit it right on, and I think Jordan was talking about it too. Like there are also teacher dispositions, right? There are also adult paradigm shifts that we have to focus on and help ourselves to make. And I think that modeling and becoming consciously competent, right, when it comes to how are we agentic in our own lives is something that it's a huge favor that we can do to our learners. I know that one of the ways that our teachers try to do that is because our program is available to juniors and seniors in high school, and they have lots of learned helplessness when they walk into that environment. We have something that we call disorientation, and we're very, very explicit with learners about what does goal setting look like? How can you become consciously competent about your own learning styles and your own successes? How have you reacted to failure? What type of perseverance do you have? All of these things that Karen and Jordan are talking about. We just decided to be very, very explicit and talk about some of that right up front. This is going to look different. It's going to feel different. It's going to sound different for both you and for me. So not only are we modeling, but we're just the best modeling we can do is to learn and be vulnerable right alongside our learners.
I feel like we all need disorientation, right?
Yeah.
From starting from like teacher prep on, I think you all are bringing up a really important point of educators need to be taught and be able to experience what this looks like for them, because the accountability structures that we have long held them to has created a very similar, we need to follow these specific guidelines, follow curriculum with fidelity, et cetera, that really limits the creativity and genius that they're able to bring into the space, which then creates an environment that it's hard for students to be able to lean into that as well. So I'm wondering how you're able to continue to sustain momentum for this way of learning. Even with some of these changes, like if you're faced with pushback, if there's new resource limitations, or if you're facing new legislation or policies that might be limiting the ways that we can show learning or are being held accountable to.
I think.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, I would just jump in and say I think part of our efforts, Ray, are that there's a reason to maybe do this inside the system. And we talked earlier about like, how do we focus on learners first? And how do we then stretch the system to accommodate that thinking through new teacher dispositions and new learner dispositions, right? So to embed this in the way that we do business, rather than maybe lifting the needle and saying, oh, well, this is a personalized learning environment and this is regular school, right? Like I'm hearing Jordan give us all kinds of amazing examples about there's this continuum of agency and there's this continuum of learning, and there are all these things that teachers and students can do. And when we make that just part of how we do business, the air that we breathe, then it's not something that needs to be sustained, right? And as long as we're taking those little steps and we're recognizing those things, I think that's probably one of the biggest things that we could do. I mean, we could talk about making systemic shifts in what our indicators are for oversight and measurement and all of these other things, but it's really the educators and the students, and for us, the community partners who are boots on the ground doing it every day. That's how we live, and that's the best way we can sustain it.
Thank you, Pat. A word at our school is vision. My principal, she is a visionary, and so when you have that vision and you say, "Hey, this is the goal, this is the dream," and as Pat said, when you live it, you breathe it, and you show that it's working, it's hard to push back from it. So if it's something you believe in, it's something that we know is important for our students. You do it well. You tweak it so that it works. You show that it works, and then people just have to fall in line. They have no choice. When you walk into the school and you see the students teaching other students, when you see eighth graders reading to kindergartners or eighth graders teaching third graders how to write, or you see the teacher smiling, walking around, interacting with students, it's hard to say that you serve students and be against that. So you set the vision, you go with it, and you make it work. You show everybody that this is how it should be done.
I totally agree with both of those things. And one of the ways that in Kentucky schools are showing people how it works is through exhibitions of learning, which are, public open nights where kids are just talking about their learning. And it's really important to frame that in both like robust and meaningful ways with good substantive feedback and hard questions and fostering reflections, but also celebratory. Like, learning should be celebrated. It should be acknowledged, and it should be joyful. And when all you're looking at is standardized test scores, I don't think anyone describes that as joyful or celebratory in nature as you're going through it as an assessment practice. So assessment can be meaningful and joyful and celebratory as you're doing it, but it can also provide a lot of public transparency into what learning looks like at your school. So when Jordan and Pat talk about, like, people see it and they're like, yes, this is what we want more of. Opening up your schools to exhibitions, defenses of learning, those kinds of things gives people real insight into what learning can look like, apart from just the old mental model of how we sort of expect school to run, driven a lot by old metrics. It is really moving. I'm with Team Jordan and Team Pat here. I don't know how anyone could say no once you see that.
It's interesting. Sorry, Ray, but Karen, it occurs to me that like I've never experienced a situation where you can unring that bell, whether it's for a teacher or a learner, right? Like I think there's this idea that we'll try it and then we won't like it and we'll go back. But the celebration and the joy, like once a learner figures that out, good luck trying to put them back in a box, right? Like sustainability takes care of itself.
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful point. And like Jinsu said, seeing is believing, right? For a lot of folks. I think one of the challenges is policymakers are not necessarily seeing what's happening, right? So I'm curious what recommendations you would make to folks in the policy space, whether that's federal, state, or local. What would you tell policymakers that they need to be considering to make sure that models like yours are able to continue to thrive?
I think what Karen said is opening up the schools, go into the schools. It's hard to make rules or expectations for people that you don't know. Go into the schools, see the schools in your districts and your communities, actually learn them, learn the teachers, and actually see what's working, what do they need, and make those policies that are realistic, authentic, connected to them, not Every student is not the same. Every community is not the same. Every teacher is not the same. We want to focus on being equitable, not just giving all the same things, giving what people need, and you only know what people need when you get to know them.
Agree, Jordan, and Pat mentioned this before. We've got to get away from seat time, Carnegie units, those really really just constrained views of how people acquire buckets of content and how long it takes them to acquire buckets of content. We've got to get away from that, and I think the way to proceed, one thing that policymakers can do is allow flexibility and waiver from those things, but really just create room for local schools and districts to develop their own bits of accountability models, and their own conversations of what accountability really means in local communities. Maybe it's around your portrait of a learner. Maybe it's around every student leaving high school with some credential. Maybe it's around kids having capstones and internships. But creating room in policy for those kinds of things, incentivizing that, connecting people in networks so they can learn from one another, dialing back some of the competition between schools so that schools could really collaborate and learn from one another. Those are all things that policy makers can do at a really high level to enable and incentivize more kind of innovation. Just got to create room for the local, I think, districts to figure it out, and then you figure out what's worth scaling or spreading through these networks.
Yeah, hallelujah. Or what's worth scaling or spreading emerges organically. Like it's almost like we don't even need to figure it out, right? And once policymakers see that, I think one of the biggest mental hangups that some of our policymakers have had is going back to something I said earlier. Our kids are part of our communities right now, right? And I think they tend to approach these kids as works in progress, and really aren't we all, right? My wife and I have a joke that our 18-year-old during the day has to raise his hand to ask to go to the bathroom, but at night is managing a restaurant, or the lifeguard for your toddlers at a swimming pool. Like these kids have capacity in real world, and I think, to Jordan's point, when they get to see and celebrate the joy of what capacities these learners have and are developing, and especially when that can become community embedded, that's when the paradigm shift happens from these are students, these are widgets, these are things in our system that we're designing for, to these are whole people and they're part of our community.
Amazing. So before I ask this final question, I want to invite everyone who is currently in tune with us to start submitting some questions in the chat and Q&A, because we're gonna move there momentarily. But what I appreciated about what each of you shared is that policy does have the power to make these changes and make things take hold. And as you're speaking, I'm just thinking about the constellation of measures that we need to be considering to understand how this is working, so we know what to scale and where. I think a lot of folks are a little nervous right now with changes to accountability systems of like, oh no, if we just let everyone innovate and we're not asking, is it working? How are we going to be able to measure or track that? But I think each of you has kind of spoken to the magic of, we can do this with the standardized assessments we currently have, and we need to be looking at some of these other pieces so that we're able to measure whether or not students are career ready, if they are expanding in growth and durable skills, if they're experiencing joy in their learning, and they're able to really build expertise in an area that's going to take them forward in their lives. So this final pre-planned question that I have for you is, what tips and tricks would you give to an educator or leader who's wanting to dip their toe in this space for the very first time?
Learn your students, value their voice. I was able to implement the student council in our school, and they have been a major. When I don't know something or I'm confused on what I think is going to be cool, I literally go around and I collect my student council and I have a meeting and I ask them. So it doesn't have to be difficult. I think sometimes we get scared that it has to be this big to do, this big shift is going to take so much time. I literally take 20 minutes and I go get them and bring them to my room and I ask their opinion. What activities do you want to do? What's something we've done that we haven't done yet this year? What is something, if money wasn't an option, if supplies weren't an option, what would you like to do? Give them the freedom. Like Karen said, they will surprise you. They can handle it. They have ideas. Sometimes they just feel like they can't share them. But if you start letting them speak, if you start letting them go, trust your audience. They're our key stakeholder. We do what we do for our students. Trust them, let them have the voice, let them have the input, and they'll lead you. Sometimes they may say something completely off the wall, and you'll have to reel them in a little bit and bring them back to reality. But somewhere in the middle between your adult brain and their big innocent ideas, you're going to find something that's going to work, and it's going to all start making sense.
I so love that, Jordan. I think for me, it really encapsulates start with learners, not logistics. Like so many times we have systemic blockers that really aren't even, I mean, I'm just going to walk down and gather my student council and get some input. Like this doesn't have to be a logistical challenge. We don't need an entirely new system in order to start designing learning around students instead of doing it the other way around.
Yeah, I agree with both. You know, we really go the long way around to just listen to kids sometimes. I mean, it's really just listen to kids. Um, uh, I think one of the things that I observed over the course of trying to support teachers in a lot of these in a shifted district in this direction, really clear success criteria is a really important part of a competency-based system. This is not just the wild, wild west of whatever kids feel like doing, whatever, however, you are working toward a particular goal. And once you're clear about where you're trying to get, and Jordan used beginning with the end in mind, I think that's really smart language. To say this is the thing that we have to accomplish together. How might we go about accomplishing this thing? And then you can co-create and sort of decide together as a group how we might accomplish this thing together. But being really clear about that success criteria is really important, because otherwise you're just going to be working toward success criteria that's framed up by somebody else. It's either seat time or a test score or a Carnegie unit or whatever. So I think being clear about what is the outcome you're trying to get to. If it's being effective communicators and proving that through a portrait of a learner portfolio, or if it is about performance on a particular assessment, or if it's about mastering these objectives of a particular unit, you just got to start there, wherever that thing is that you're trying to get to, and then co-create from there. But yeah, I just agree with both of you. We don't have to go the long way around to listen to kids. But yeah.
I think what I'm loving about this is the simplicity, right? When we learn to be educators, the first thing we learn is backwards mapping, or at least it often is, right? And so it seems so simple. Of course, know the people that you're interacting with, engage them in real, authentic conversations around what should learning look like and how can we accomplish that? And know what your goal is, right? And think about what those constellation of measures could be to help you really get there, and then map along the way. Beautiful insights, and I really appreciate this conversation. So we have a couple of questions that came in through the chat. So I'm going to start with a question from Ginger, who asks, could you address student autonomy in regard to conflict resolution? I understand that in Japan, conflict resolution autonomy is encouraged.
For me, Ginger, I think conflict resolution is part of a foundational social emotional skills, right? Like self-awareness, social awareness, relationship skills. And I think that the interesting point that brings up as we're talking about what could learner experiences look like that are personalized, authentic, that include voice and choice is the more authentic experiences we allow our learners to engage in, the more authentic the conflict resolution that they're engaging in is, right? So solving a real problem and having a potential creative conflict or process conflict over that common goal that Karen was talking about, that clear success criteria, is a much more healthy environment for our learners to develop those social emotional skills in than a sort of more rote traditional, lesson type classroom where I think sometimes the conflict resolution tends to be a little bit more petty or a little bit more logistical, right? It's not about controlling learners. Are we solving real problems? And if we are, then we're having healthy conflicts. And what are the skills that we use to leverage those healthy conflicts to everyone's benefit?
Teach in middle school, I absolutely want them to solve their own conflicts, because if you've ever had middle school, there's about 50 a day. So I hope that they can be able to handle some of them. But like Pat said, and like we mentioned earlier, everything is about modeling and showing. So if you kind of model and show how to handle conflict as you as the teacher, you handle situations. The hope is that they start mimicking some of those positive traits that you do, and then they do know how to settle some of those things without ever having to bring you into it. Or by the time you hear about it, it's already been settled, and then you could give them some type of praise or some type of kudos for handling it that well. And then you kind of come in on the back end to support them so that they do it again that way instead of it blowing up. But when you're in the school system, there's always going to be conflict. Sometimes you do have to step in or at least model the ways that this could be handled so that they do it on their own. But I definitely encourage that autonomy so that I'm not getting misbodied 50 times to handle a bunch of conflicts throughout the day.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to step in on you, Karen, but you know, something else occurs as Jordan is talking, which is, I think as adults, if we're not collaborating and if we're not making the collaboration that we do transparent to our learners, to her point about modeling, we can't model collaboration for learners if we don't have another adult there to collaborate, and we can't model conflict resolution for learners if we aren't transparent and vulnerable about the struggles that we have as adult learners and as adult collaborators. That's part of the working world, and that's part of being a viable part of a community and a culture. So I think there's definitely some adult work to be done there in supporting our learners.
Mhm.
Yeah, Pat, I think that's actually a really great way to help kind of wrap us up, since we just hit the hour mark, which makes me very sad. But from what I'm hearing from this conversation is that student voice, choice, and agency are critical and really the path forward for quality education experiences. And in order for us to get there, we need to be able to model that and create spaces for educators to lean in and for adults to be able to understand how to communicate. What does agency look like for them? Really building a culture around respect that wraps around the entire education field rather than focusing in on just one space. I want to thank each of you for your amazing insights. Jordan, Pat, Karen, I know I have learned a ton today, and you've shared some really wonderful resources that I hope folks check out. If you want to stay in touch, we always would love to continue this conversation. But we thank each of you for joining us today, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of your very hot, if you're on the East Coast, afternoon.